Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat. That's Parashiot Behar-Behukotai, double parasha. What is our value and how much are we worth? And I mean in dollars. We'll get to addressing that in a moment. This double parasha is highlighted, of course, Parashat Behar, of the mighty and deep, powerful mitzvot of Shemitah and Yovel, and their historical ramifications. And Parashat Behukotai, of course, is highlighted by the terrible curses and predictions, the ominous eventualities that befall Am Yisrael in our tragic history. And this morning we'll discuss none of the above. Rather, we'll talk about a very, you can say, inconspicuous mitzvah that is overshadowed by all the curses of Parashat Behukotai, found towards the middle end of the parasha, and it's sort of under the radar. It's a mitzvah known as Arachim. There is a Masechet, actually, in the Mishnayot called Masechet and Gemara, Masechet Arachim, and we're referring to a mitzvah that is located in our parasha. And of course, we're in Vayikra, Behukotai, Perek Kav Zayin, chapter 27, right in the beginning of the Perek. And we'll read just a couple of Pesukim and identify what this mitzvah and what these set of laws are. And then we'll address our question. V'daber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Pasuk bet, daber el bnei Yisrael, ve'amarta alehem, ish, ki yafli neder, be'arkecha nefashot ladonai. This word ki yafli, associated with neder, is already familiar to us, going back to Parashat Naso, to the Mitzvah of Nazir. The word Yafli, the Pashtanim, Achamim, that analyze text tell us that it's to separate. One who separates himself, it also has a root word of being wondrous, who separates himself with the following neder. The neder is Be'arkecha nefashot laHashem, dedicating to God a value of nefashot, of a person or people. What is that referring to? Well, she explains, and this is a basic mitzvah and a type of neder that one can make, and that is that when one pledges to Hashem, which means it becomes hekdesh. This is a neder in the realm of hekdesh, the equivalent of actually sanctifying property, physical asset to God, where you'll have to redeem it for its value and pay its value, which then goes to Bedek Habayit, to the maintenance of the Bet HaMikdash. So too, if somebody pledges the value of a human being, how does that work? To HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he will then be liable to a certain amount of set money, a standard that's placed by the Torah on that person, whoever it is, and he'll have to then redeem his vow by pledging that money that was the equivalent of his vow. That's called Arachin. And here is the presentation of the Pasuk when one exalts himself, when one separates his money, when one separates his words, so to speak, and a vow to God based on value of people. Pesukim go on to give us a scale of standards. The hierarchy based on gender and age of what these values are. Let's say I said I'm vowing the value of him, Mr. X, and that person is between 20 to 60 years old and is male. Now you owe to the godly fund 50 shekalim. Goes on to say in the next pasuk, if it's a female, same age range, 30 shekalim, between 5 and 20 years for a male, 20 shekalim, female 10, from 1 month old until 5 years old, that's in pasuk vav. For a male, 5 shekalim value for that vow, if you vow the value of that person, and for a female, 3. And finally, the last tier, the retirement tier, over 60 years, And the value for a male, 15 shekalim, female, 10. And that is the full set of hierarchy and the tier value of vows for these type of pledges that one makes. And again, a person just simply says that the value of such and such is upon me. And now look up the chart and you can know, he can know how much does he now owe to Kodesh. Kodesh goes to, in the old days, Bet HaKabayit, which is the maintenance of the Bet HaMikdash, and nowadays we go to Tzedakah. It's a very interesting mitzvah. And the Sefer HaChinuch, in discussing the reason for this mitzvah, really presents a very general concept and a conceptual idea, somewhat deep. He says, when a person wants to engage and connect with something beyond the physical, with something that is godly, divine, metaphysical, he has to do it with words, because words is what makes us into, he calls a nefesh haya, which is God framed the human being, as translated by the Aramaic translation, Targum Kelus, as Ruach Melala, talking being. Our verbalization is the expression, in essence, I'm embellishing upon Sefer HaChinuch, is the expression of our intellect. Our intellect is what separates us from the rest of the species on planet Earth. What makes the Homo sapien species special? It's our higher intellect that we have. Of course, most species can communicate, but our specific manner of verbalization is the expression of our intellect. And when we want to become more than just a mundane physical being, of course, we engage in our intellect and we express it by our words. And says the Sefer HaChinuch, therefore, it is incumbent absolutely upon us that when one pledges or says or commits to his words, he must keep to his word, because that is simply preserving our higher order existence in this world as human beings. Because if one does not follow up upon and sanctify and keep his word, then we are not preserving the very element, the verbalization, the expression of our intellect that makes us into who we are, this holy race called the human being, and specific segment chosen, a people among them, which are Jews, Am Yisrael. And therefore it's critical to always keep our word. Now, that only explains, generally speaking, why it's so critical when someone makes a neder, as it says in Parashat Matalon, lo yahel devaro, kechol hayoseh mipiv ya'aseh. Should never make his words mundane. He must always follow up upon, commit to, let his words play out in actions, and keep to what he said. But it doesn't specifically address this very interesting type of neder called arachim. Now, by the way, this whole value idea based on age and gender, we would never get away with in today's day, right? I mean, obviously, if you make any difference between male and female, you're sexist. And in fact, if you're making nowadays really up to date differences between age ranges, well, you're not equitable, right? Everything's got to be the same. And therefore, this is very a non-politically correct mitzvah, to say the least. But we trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We won't go into the value system that he chose and the numbers that he applied to various age ranges and genders. God, that's your business. But it still is a fascinating type of vow to make, and the fact that there is such a thing as value put on human beings, which then will be redeemed in money. And so Sefer HaChinuch, as powerful of an idea that is, I think we have to go further. And we have to ask ourselves several questions. One question is the nature of this very vow. Another obvious question should be its chosen location in the Torah, its placement here in the Parashat, its juxtaposition to all of the daunting, tragic predictions of the suffering and tragedies to befall Am Yisrael, which all we hope right now have all occurred and are beyond us already. But in a very difficult history, and ending in the middle here towards past the midpoint of the Parashat Behukotai, we segue right into this mitzvah. What is the connection? What does that have to do with it? Question 2, we'll call it. And question 3, I'll just read you from a midrash that makes a very bold statement regarding this mitzvah. It says, again, the wording in the pasuk is that someone makes an nefashot laHashem, and Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is Midrash Tanhuma, Im atem mevi'im lefanai arachin, if you bring before me your value, in other words, money is based on a pledge, the value of the money based on the pledge that you made, then ani ma'aleh alechem kilu hikraftem nafshotechem lefanai. I'm going to count and give you credit as if you actually offered your whole being before me. Of course, the Midrash is sensitive to the text and the terminology chosen by the Torah of nefashot, soul beings. And again, if you actually follow through with your pledge, then I'm going to count it as if you pledged your entire self. What does that mean? You gave yourself, maybe you even gave your life up for God, it means. And further, continues the Midrash and says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'zkut ha'arachin ani masil atchem ma'arichat yehnam. The merit of keeping this type of vow and following through this mitzvah, I'm going to save you from the assessment of Gehinnom. We don't want to go there and imagine what that even is, but you're saved from that. So what is this, grandiose type of language being used from the Midrash to describe this mitzvah? So I want to try to frame the mitzvah by a very simple observation made by the Ibn Ezra. When would it be that someone would make such a vow? Regular hikadesh, as we call it, is very understandable. I feel right now not only generous, but I feel very, committed, indebted, and yearning to give of myself to Hashem. Fine. So I'll say this is hikadesh. I'll sanctify this value, sort of forcing myself into tzedakah, into a pledge, into a monetary commitment, because I'll have to redeem whatever it is. And that was very common. This table, that bookshelf, right? Common. When would a person actually, pivot to a different level of pledge and actually say the value of him, of you, of me to God? Ibn Ezra says the very practical context of that were to be when someone is desperately communicating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And a person would say something like this, Hashem, in fact, maybe I'll read you the language of the Ibn Ezra because it's powerful. He says, God, if you only do this for me now, if you only come through for me, a moment of desperation where a person honestly calls out to God, is almost in a deal-making mode. Hashem, take care of me now. Be there for me now. Don't let me down, Hashem. And that's when you make your pledge. Fill in the blank. And you might say in that moment of desperation, I'm all yours, Hashem. I'll do anything. My value is yours. My child's value is yours. My family's value is yours. It's something that's a very strong, bold pledge, but in the context of desperation and feeling a great need and yearning for Hashem's salvation. That is a very practical situation that such a neder might be engaged in, might be utilized by this person. You think of it, that is maybe the higher end type of neder to be used. When a person really is at that moment, right? I call out, I need help. I innately reach out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in my moments of desperation. And often when I do that, I do it in the form of a vow. Hashem, if you help me now, I'll be like this. I'll never do this again. And that, therefore, calls for very specific application of the type of commitment that you're making. That's something that you want a deal, says Hashem. I'll make you a deal. I'm willing to do my part. But you have to be very specific now. You're not just pledging a table to me. I'm going to tell you what the value is. And you want to talk about your son, or your friend, or yourself, or your wife? I'm going to apply a value to that. It's really critical. You know what you're getting yourself into right now. I want to help you, but you have to really man up, so to speak, to what you just said. And that, therefore, is Hashem's standards for you fulfilling this type of higher end vow. And now it's very more, let's say, realistic to understand this juxtaposition at the specific placement of Hashem in the Torah of this mitzvah. Because says the Kli Yakar, really, this is who Am Yisrael is. Am Yisrael is a nation who calls out to Hashem, Be'et Sarah Ya'ancha Adonai Beyom Sarah. God answers you in the time of Sarah. After we list all of the Sarah, all of the difficulties and the tragedies and the suffering of Am Yisrael, we talk about a higher end, a higher order neder. Because B'sha'at Sarah, Am Yisrael naturally reaches out to God and makes pledges. Isn't that what Yaakov Abinu did when he was fleeing from Esav? Hasileni na miyad achi miyad Esav v'yidar Yaakov neder lemor im yihyeh Elohim imadi, etc., etc. And God does all this for me, then I'll be willing to also commit to Hashem. Says the Kli Yakar, but there's a difference. Am Yisrael don't usually play Yaakov's standard out. Because Yaakov Abinu did his end, performed his end of the deal, always did, despite how his life played out. And Am Yisrael, unfortunately, from the times of Yetziat Mitzrayim and settling in Eretz Yisrael, in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash, and throughout the Tanakh and the kings and the second Beit HaMikdash, unfortunately, we developed a pattern. And that pattern is God saved me from this sorrow. And Hashem did save them. As we say in the Mizmor, Yasirem, right? In the Mizmor of Pesach. And then we reach our comfort level and zone, and then we slip and we retreat and we regress back to our previous stage. And therefore, all of the curses in Behar-Behukotai, which expressed basically, you're going to be a temporary relationship with me, God says. I'll have a temporary relationship with you. It can't just be that you're a fair weather friend. It's not enough to make a neder in the time of sorrow. A person's got to be consistent in his commitment with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That should only be the impetus, the trigger, the catalyst for a person's commitment to God. But then you take it from there, and you stay even keel, and you maintain, and you even take it up a level, but not going backwards. And thus, this brilliantly placed by Kadosh Baruch Hu, this law of nedarim, and this specific type of neder, is right after the suffering. Perhaps tell Am Yisrael that what I'm looking for from you is, of course, the connection. Of course, I'm there for you. Of course, call out to me when you need me in a time of sorrow. But then stick with me. This is a historical lesson, and really, implicitly, a historical tongue lashing by God to Am Yisrael. Don't regress again. Don't go back anymore. It's a deal. We have a deal. Where's your end of the deal? It's not conditional. commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is through thick and thin. And therefore, says Hashem, make the neder. Make it the higher end, highest type of commitment to me in the time of sorrow. I'll hear you. I'll respond to you. But stick to it. And therefore, says the Midrash, that if one vows such a neder based on human value in such a time of desperation, but sticks to it and keeps to it like I expect, then ma'aleh ani alechem, I consider it as if you gave your nefesh, because you really are. Then you're giving your entire life to me. And you're just using that neder as the trigger to get ourselves on track and stay on track. And as a nation, Am Yisrael, never to go backwards again, and never to retreat back into the times where God necessitates the tragedy, Chas v'shalom. And only to, as we maintain our commitment to Him, go beyond the necessity for punishment and wait for the good times, B'ezrat Hashem, as Parashat Behukotai also predicts, but stick to only those good times, B'ezrat Hashem, as we stick to our nidarim and our commitment and know what our value is. Our value is the nation, the chosen nation, the people that Hashem waits for to be a permanent partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen v'amen. Shabbat shalom.